This Organized Chaos video is brought to you by Gems Art Studio. This video is also brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. Hello again. I'm going to try to get caught up on some requests. I have a whole bunch of requests and I haven't really done any. I almost didn't do a request today. And the reason why is because I'm seeing everyone talk about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard defamation suit going on. It's, quite frankly, it's obnoxious. I think it's insane that it's being televised. These are things that, honestly, these are private things that shouldn't be televised. It's absolutely insane how everybody's talking about it, and everybody seems to mostly be on Johnny Depp's side. And I'm going to give you flat out my opinion on this. And I thought about doing a whole video on this, but I'm not going to because I don't want to. And I'm going to tell you why. Because, as I've brought before, I've been through a divorce. I know firsthand terrible things are said in a divorce. Terrible. And we do not want to judge people for what they say during a divorce. We do not want to judge people for what they say or what comes out during a divorce. We're seeing the worst. These are two people who loved each other, who are focusing all their aggression on each other. That's the thing. The people you love are the people who you can really hurt. I mean, that's how come you see it in all the comic book stories. How, I guess you don't see it on here, but like Professor X and Magneto were best friends. You need a really close relationship to become really, antagonistic towards each other, because those are the people who can really hurt you. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and these are two people who are hurt. They're hurt. And they're just going through the court system. And you might even say, you're talking about divorce court. This isn't a divorce court. This is a defamation lawsuit. To which my response is, a rough divorce can have a couple different trials in a couple different forms. We are just essentially seeing divorce part 2. The best result for these two is hopefully they come to some sort of agreement they can live with and start putting this behind them. But honestly, that's all I have to say on that. I'm not going to talk about the details. I'm not going to say, oh, so-and-so is bad and so-and-so is good. Because these are just two people who loved each other, who now hate each other, who are just going to say the worst things ever. And there's a decent chance in a year or two they're going to regret some of the things they said. They're going to regret some of the things they did. And we don't want to judge these people for this event. And I know a lot of people are saying, hey, Johnny Depp was fired for Fantastic Beasts. Shouldn't Amber Heard be fired for Aquaman? To which my response is, I've already said my opinion on Fantastic Beasts. Johnny Depp dodged a bullet, in my opinion. He got paid 100% for that last movie and shot one scene and didn't have to do anything. I think he dodged a bullet missing out on that. Now, should he have been fired? No. I don't think he should have been fired. Because things that come out during a divorce can be bad. And it's part of a divorce. But by the same respect, should Amber Heard be hired? No. Because things that come out during divorce can be bad. It is. It is what it is. But yeah, I don't feel sorry for Johnny Depp because he lost Fantastic Beasts role. Because honestly, who wants to be associated with that franchise? That franchise is burned at this point. But yeah, no, that was just my 2-piece on that whole trial. Everybody's talking about, and I don't want to talk about again because it's a divorce. It's nasty. Instead, you know what? I'm going to do what I said at the beginning of this video. I'm going to get to a request. This is from, what is it? Maria Zapato. I don't know if you're going to reply to this, but can you react to woke comics versus manga from Literature Devil? Now, it doesn't look like I replied to this, but maybe I took the screenshot before I replied. If I didn't reply, consider this whole video your reply. You're getting a whole video form for your reply. So, hey, can't complain about that. But yeah, I read it. I got your request. And that's what we're going to do. Literature Devil is yet another YouTuber I have never heard of. He's got 126,000 subscribers, and I'm not, like... This... I don't even know if this is good or bad looking at this page. This could be fine. Fixing Ray's character with one simple trick. I mean, just say, like, here's the one I'm going to watch, and just saying woke in a title is a little discouraging. But, I mean, I'll be completely... Is Comic Gates wrong? Ooh, they do Comics Gate stuff? Oh, I don't want to do any more Comics Gate stuff. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do the ultimate test and find out if this is a person to be taken seriously. You know, there's some terminology here that's a little cringe, but I don't know. This might be okay. This might actually be okay. Let's find out. Let's dive into the video. Come on.
Comics are not for everyone, and superhero comics are still for men. Don't at me.
Yeah, but there is actually a growing fan base for women. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. 63% of comics are bought by men, 37% by women. So yes, it is primarily men, but not 100%. There's still a fair amount of women in there.
Diversity is strength has been a repeated mantra and a major point of contention during the era of woke Western media. The assertion from the mainstream professionals who worship at this particular altar of this particular mindset argue that stories are made better, not necessarily by well-written characters, but by the mere inclusion of characters of a particular race, gender, or sexual orientation.
I want you to show me one person who made that argument. The argument has always been characters of a different sexual orientation or gender or race. It's just meant to be inclusion. It's meant to normalize things. It's not meant to make it better. I instantly dislike his representation here. He's creating a straw man argument. Nobody's arguing you need to replace well-written characters. You still need a well-written character, but you can have that well-written character be someone who is less represented. White guys are represent a lot in comic books. A lot. And they're just saying, hey, let's spread out a bit. And from a business standpoint, it makes sense in an attempt to appeal to a broader fan base. This is the logic.
Clarification, not stories exploring the unique experiences or the intriguing cultures behind these token characters, but simply their presence alone. The idea...
Nobody argues that. Jesus Christ. This is gonna make a straw man. God, we aren't even a minute in. Oh, God.
The idea behind this practice focuses on the goal of representation, which, in this context, refers to creators switching their central focus around story, where characters are created to serve roles in a plot, to the idea of representation, where characters are created or altered to act as stand-ins for certain categories of certain audience members who are, allegedly, underrepresented in media. As Kevin Feige, boss of Marvel Studios, once said to Rotten Tomatoes, representation is important across the board, and the comics has charts the path in almost all ways for what we do in the MCU. And in the comics, there are many LGBTQ characters, and we want to showcase that on screen as well. We want to bring those characters to life on the screen.
Okay, I just want to go ahead and establish that there's absolutely nothing wrong with what he just said. Nothing at all.
Examples of this practice at play includes DC officially changing villain characters Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy from friends to lovers, or changing the traditionally male character.
Which is awesome. I love that relationship. Because that is actually Harley Quinn and Joker is a super fucking toxic relationship. And her maturing and getting to a relationship with Poison Ivy, I love it. It's great.
Character of Taskmaster to female in Marvel's 2021 Black Widow movie in order.
Okay, yeah, but they really did a poor job with that. They the gender of Taskmaster doesn't matter, but they did a really poor job. Number one, it's Taskmaster in that movie had the issues with Taskmaster was that it had the character. Well, honestly, there was no character. It was just a blank slate, and they can do the copying move thing, but there was this secret red dust thing. It's been a while since I've seen it. Hey, I have that tin here. Yeah, what? Yeah, that guy. But yeah, they did there's that secret dust thing to make him or her lose their abilities. It was really weak writing. The issue was not that it was a woman at all. If your argument is the issue that it was a woman character, you're wrong. The issue is that it was poorly written.
To supposedly showcase more physically strong female characters. Or when in 2015, when Marvel Comics changed a traditionally heterosexual Iceman to homosexual by way of Jean Grey scrambling his brain, all for the sake of inclusion.
Well, people have grown older and found that their sexual orientation changes. This is a thing that actually happens in real life. So, a new study of 12,000 people says sexuality changes well into adulthood. But, I don't think the actual numbers matter here. The fact is, it happens. People will grow older and find their sexual orientation changes. Either maybe they were forcing themselves into a mold because of society, and as they get older, they decide, fuck that. Or they just didn't really know themselves until later. Or they change. People change. There's lots of reasons, but people change their sexuality. So having a pre-existing character change his sexuality, okay. I mean, were we really dedicated to the heterosexuality of Iceman? Was that a character where we were like, oh god, we need Iceman to be heterosexual. I can't handle him not being heterosexual. Really? Really? I'm going to base my entire identity on the fact that Iceman's heterosexual.
To quote Kit Haring, director of Marvel's television series Loki, "From the moment I joined Loki, it was very important to me and my goal to acknowledge Loki as bisexual. It is a part of who he is and who I am too. I know this is a small step, but I'm happy, and my heart is so full to say that this is now canon in MCU. A sister assertion is, along with diversity of character, race, or gender, is diversity of creator. So, you had Marvel's America Chavez being written by Gabby Rivera, not due to a solid pedigree in superhero stories or science fiction, but simply because Gabby matched the skin color and sexuality of the character. To quote Gabby Rivera on America Chavez, "Well, we kicked the idea of America going to college. I'm new to comics. This is my first comic. And so, I was just a little stuck." Will Moss, the editor at Marvel, was like, "Well, what's your dreams?"
Okay, but they might have more insight. It doesn't mean they're a bad writer. If they're a bad writer, criticize some of their work. But yeah, there is a logic to that. They will have more insight into that character. It doesn't mean they have to match the skin color or sexuality or gender even of the character, but it will make it easier for them. This doesn't seem all that far-fetched. Now, do you have a critique of the actual writing? Because that's what I'm waiting for.
School. And that was when I was like, bam! I would want to go to Intergalactic Sotomayor University. Justice Sotomayor is a huge inspiration to me. And when I was first starting out, I read her book, My Beloved World, over and over again. I thought, what better place to explore the ancestry of black and brown intergalactic folks, aliens and other worlds? Imagine if there was a university that had all of that and was in its own separate part of the multiverse. Story used only as a vehicle for racial discussion. Or how comics professional Jose Garcia was unceremoniously dismissed from a Batgirl project because DC editorial mentioned that they didn't want male creators writing for female characters. To quote, "I was doing some tryouts for DC Comics, but I kind of got gatekept by Gail Simone."
How do you know that? They might have just thought of the background and then wrote a story around it, and the story might have been fucking awesome. Critique the story. Don't just look at the outline and be like, oh, how dare they? No. Lots of times people come up with the outline before they come up with the specific stories, or an idea that they want to get across before they figure out the specific story specifics. That's very common.
I actually landed a job on Batgirl, and everything was already set for me to start drawing. The editor, I don't know if it was Gail or I don't know what happened there, but I was given this excuse that they didn't want any male artists handling Batgirl, so I pretty much I was showed the door. This mentality is also why an antagonistic flow of faux moral outrage urged.
I have very mixed feelings about that, because like I already said, I understand the idea of you want somebody to have a bit more lived experience. So I understand that argument. But if the person's a good writer, I'll give it to them. I don't have much to say other than I have very mixed feelings about that. But I feel like if they're a good writer, let them have it. An argument can be made that female writers have a lot less opportunities, so it's good to leave those opportunities open for them as much as possible. Then an argument can be made for that. So this is actually part 2 of the video. I didn't realize it stopped recording midway through, so I'm gonna have to figure out about where it looks like. Oh yes, we were talking about Batgirl. So yeah, I'm not gonna research this because I did research it and it got cut off, but I actually agree with him on this one point. Jose Garcia seems like a guy who's kind of a legend in the comic industry. He's been doing it for whatever. He's probably written well over 100 comic books, doing it for decades. I understand the idea of, hey, we want to leave these spots open for women, because women may not usually get the opportunity. That being said, I feel like he's kind of earned a spot to be the exception. He seems like he's probably a really good writer. And even though we have this quote, he hasn't really outwardly complained about too much. He just kind of told his story. So I kind of respect him for just kind of saying it. I kind of feel like I agree with Literature Devil. I agree with him on this one point. I feel like he probably should have been allowed to write Batgirl. I understand their reasoning for kicking him, but I disagree. And I agree with Literature Devil on this one point. I've disagreed with him on everything else on this, but this one point, I'll give him credit. I will give him credit on that one.
I don't know if it was Gale or I don't know what happened there, but I was given this excuse that they didn't want any male artists handling Batgirl, so I pretty much I was showed the door. This mentality is also why an antagonistic flow of faux moral outrage urged Scarlett Johansson to step aside from her role as Meiji Kusanagi in the 2017 Ghost in the Shell movie, arguing that such a role should be reserved for a Japanese actor. Or later.
That casting was fucking weird, because that was definitely meant to be a Japanese character, and they cast Scarlett Johansson, and it was stunt casting. She's a big name. They wanted to put her name over the marquee. That was exclusively why she was cast. And the story handled it weird. Like, if you're going to cast Scarlett Johansson, I figured, okay, you're just going to Americanize the whole thing. But they actually didn't. It was still set in Japan, all the characters were Japanese, and they even figured out a weird way to try to say Scarlett Johansson's character was Japanese. It was weird, like she was a consciousness of a Japanese person put into a cybernetic body, I believe they went with. Yeah, it was weird how they wrote it in. Yeah, it was just weird. They shouldn't have done that. I absolutely agree that it was, that whole movie was just bad, so...
Later, when the same puritanical shriek effectively forced her to walk away from a transgender role on the movie Robin Tubb. The argument again asserting that such a role should be reserved for a legitimately transgender actor.
Well, transgender actors actually have less opportunities, so it makes sense not to take the little opportunities that are kind of built in for them. Scarlett Johansson being cast in that role is clearly a publicity stunt. Clearly.
All of this boils down to what we'll call the representation mentality, which emphasizes race and gender over merit, with the presence of any actual ability being treated as a bonus. The idea behind this is the theory that increasing the variety of voices, experiences, and perspectives will make for better stories. But when American creatives mention diversity, it's painfully clear that they are emphasizing a diversity in superficial traits over all else.
Source? No, they like to talk about it because they do like to promote when they do stuff like this, because I guess it's like brownie points. And sometimes the publicity for that type of thing can get kind of cringe, but there's plenty of times where it's done and it's good writing, and plenty of times when it's done when it's bad writing. If you want to argue, hey, they shouldn't make this the central point of their publicity for it, of their advertising for it. Okay, we can sit down and have a talk about that. But when your argument is, hey, they just shouldn't do it, I completely disagree.
including life experience. Rather, it's assumed that one's skin shade and bedroom proclivities automatically come with a standard bundle of experiences like a starting kit in a role-playing game.
Oh god, dude, we've already covered this. Ugh.
And it's probably here where I'm supposed to go on a rant about some kind of underlying agenda, but that isn't necessarily the case. As Kelly Sue DeConnick, a comic book creator who is likely best known for grinding down Captain Marvel until all semblance of humanity has been thoroughly crushed from a character, mentioned...
Well, this is something else I researched while it was crashed, and I didn't realize it was crashed. So, she actually wrote the relaunch of Captain Marvel in 2012. The most successful launch of Captain Marvel ever. It launched the character into a new level of fame. It made Captain Marvel known. And it wasn't even close. So he is tagging this writer who wrote the massively successful relaunch of Captain Marvel to the movie version, which was iffy. But it's not the same. And I'll bet you money he hasn't read the relaunch. I'll bet you money he hasn't. And I looked into like some of her quotes, and it's not bad stuff. DeConnick makes a point to break the damsel in distress trope in her work. She received backlash from comics fans for several of the changes she made to Carol Danvers comics during her writer for Miss Marvel and, oh my god, it's highlighting everything, and Captain Marvel, which resulted in accusations of being an angry feminist and taking the character and inserting her feminist agenda. Sure. I do like this. DeConnick also proposed the sexy lamp test, adjacent to the Bechtel test. In a 2012 interview, she said, if you can replace your female character with a sexy lamp, the story will basically still work. You need another draft. I 100% agree with that. And if you're not familiar with the Bechtel test is essentially... it's to measure how well women are represented in your work. Essentially, to pass the Bechtel test at one point in your story, you need two women to talk to each other, not about men. About anything else but men. Now, it's worth noting there are certain stories that simply will not pass it by the nature of it. There's the Tom Hardy movie Locke. That's him in a car talking to people the entire runtime. It's actually really good, too. It's surprisingly good for that setup. But yeah, that's not going to pass it just by the nature. There's also the movie Oleana, which is a male teacher and a woman student, essentially in his office, in and out throughout like a year, I want to say, with different issues. But yeah, that's not going to pass because it's a conversation between those two exclusively throughout the whole thing. So like, there are arguments at the Bechdel test. There are times where failing it's 100% fine. But as a general rule, I'd say you probably want to pass it. And one thing I brought up was how often Star Trek passes it. The original series passed the Bechdel test 7.5% of the time. TNG passed it 44.9% of the time. DS9 passed it 57.8% of the time. Voyager passed it 86.9% of the time. And Enterprise passed it 39% of the time, which is a huge decline. It did worse than TNG, like 20 years later. And it's worth noting, because Enterprise did some cringe stuff with T'Pol, which is probably what it was. They really, like, they sexualized 7 and 9 in Voyager, but I feel like they really kind of went, like, next level with T'Pol. Kind of, like, to the point where it's like I remember they had the decontamination booth where they had to, like, get naked and, like, rub this oil over each other. It was cringe as fuck. Enterprise had a decent third season and a pretty good fourth season. But yeah, especially those early seasons, oof, it was kind of cringe. But yeah, that's just, I think as a general rule, unless your story really doesn't work with it, passing the Bechdel test and passing her, the sexy lamp test, I think those sound 100% reasonable to me.
In an interview, we're very worried about comics right now. Mainstream comic sales are down.
Boy, that's hard because from our perspective, the industry has contracted and we're very worried about comics right now. So it's always interesting to me that the outside perspective is like, comics are booming.
Some might argue that this is simply due to a shift in audience preference from comics to movies, but the boom of Japanese manga, with series like Demon Slayer famously selling so well that the success of an individual series can be reasonably compared to the entire American comic industry, not only shows us a different take on diversity, but also displays how the woke American comic book method via social justice is objectively damaging American comics. To quote Rutgers, a New Jersey-based university known for its focus on research,
Okay, so yeah, something else I was looking into while it crashed. Mangas, it's theorized are doing much more popular because animes are becoming more popular. That being said, comic book movies are huge. Marvel movies are still huge. So I don't know if that quite explains it, but I don't think it's like woke shit. Like, essentially, that would mean his argument is if comic books want to outsell manga, then they need to make all the lead characters white guys. Again, it breaks down to that. Make all the main characters white guys. That's not gonna fix it, dude. There's something else at play here.
Heroes may rule at the movies, but where comic books are sold, manga reigns supreme. Even years later, this claim not only remains true, but has risen in strength. As manga gained favor with American audiences, and the adoration for the American superhero comic fell, and as American comic book creators, with their plastic personalities, impotently sang the praises of a booming comics industry as they themselves were herded into a tiny corner in their very own market. Videos like this one.
Okay, so I'm at Barnes & Noble. So this is the manga. As you can see, manga, and then graphic novels.
Taken by that Star Wars girl, began to flood the scene, showing exactly how badly all your Kelly Sue DeConnick's, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Daniel Kibblesmiths, and Mark Wades are being dominated in their own industry. All of which echoes back to DeConnick's ominous admission that we're very worried about comics right now.
Okay, what's your exact argument? Yeah, comic sales are down, manga's doing well. I mean, all print media is down, period. Across the board. Manga does seem to be, like, immune to it right now. But I mean, these things come in waves. I mean, again, it just seems like his argument, oh, well, you know, it would all get fixed if it was all done by white guys. Is that your argument? It'd get fixed if it was done by white guys? I mean, Jesus.
But why exactly? Does it have anything to do, perhaps, with the rampant dishonest writing of American mainstream comics, where writers like Coates are praised for their adolescent-level craftsmanship, where characters are no longer written as people, but two-dimensional conduits for often baseless political tantrums?
Oh my god, can you give me a fucking source on that? Just gonna say some shit, huh? Cool.
Absolutely. However, the reality might be less of a widespread consumer revolution.
Jordan Peterson said he inspired the villain into Coates Captain. Oh yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah, that was kind of funny. I mean, it is kind of true. Jordan Peterson kind of has this father quality to the right wing where he makes these rules to life. And it's mostly it's actually kind of fine stuff, and then there's some cringe in it. But, yeah, it does seem like the type of mentality that would suit Red Skull.
Against agenda-driven comics, and more of a consumer walkaway from agenda-driven comics, because many of the problems pushing audiences away during the woke era of comics would still be a problem, even without the political motivation. Why?
Well, that's the thing. Comic book sales were going down even before they were doing this. So what's your argument? I mean, it always just seems to break down to, yeah, we just need to put white men in charge of everything. It's just so cringe.
Why? Because, as always, it all boils down to story mechanics. When your main focus moves from structure, characters, and believability, the quality of the craft is diminished in favor of something else. In romances, the indulgence of a particular love fantasy may take priority over good writing. To take the romance subplot from Amazon's The Boys, for example, Starlight was still into Huey, despite Huey not bringing anything to the relationship, except emotional validation. A far cry from what he does in the comic, where he provides protection and refuge after Starlight becomes overwhelmed by the world, while she supported him emotionally as he dealt with the...
No, I think they have pretty good chemistry in that series. I'll be blunt. I think they have good chemistry.
Repressed sadness over his girlfriend's death. In other words, a mutual give and take. However, Starlight wasn't the vulnerable and naive character she was in the comics. She was a strong, independent woman who don't need no man. But the order had been given. The romance needed to happen and...
Well, wait, she wanted to be with Huey, too. When did she become the I don't need no man? And plus, yeah, let's be blunt. Women don't need a man. Men don't need women. I mean, I guess technically if you want the species to survive, sure, you gotta make kids at some point. But, like, you should be happy to be single, too. There's nothing wrong with that. Perspective or ideology. You should be with somebody that makes you happy. If they don't make you happy, then don't.
Anyway, so they kept the romance and left much of Starlight's vulnerability behind. And we were left with less of a couple and more of a...
Starlight seemed pretty vulnerable in The Boys. She seemed very vulnerable in The Boys. She was the newbie. She was really learning stuff. I hate how these videos just assert stuff and don't critically analyze things. Oh, God.
Master and pet scenario. With Mary Sue's, it's the author's personal power fantasy that takes priority, choosing moments that make their characters look cool and awesome even over the world's rules. Like a character instantly learning force powers in Star Wars, despite the previously established need for training. And with political bias, it's the romanticization of one's worldview.
I love how he just throws that out there. Listen, we have not seen that many people learn the Force, so we actually don't know how many people learned it kind of intuitively. Although the fact is, somebody at some point had learned it intuitively, otherwise nobody would know how to use it.
You coupled with the demonization of those who don't share it. Like when Coates clearly demonized Jordan Peterson by turning him into the Red Skull.
Oh God, you just gonna soy over Jordan Peterson now? Jordan Peterson's like half insane. I don't even like talking about him because I feel like I'm like criticizing somebody with a mental deficiency. I swear to God, his brain's not there. Half the time he speaks, it's fucking word salad.
A literal Nazi. Or how...
No, fuck it. We're gonna make fun of Jordan Peterson right now. Somebody's gotta do a word salad compilation. Okay, so we're gonna watch some Jordan Peterson word salad. If this guy wants to soy over Jordan Peterson, we're gonna have some fun making fun of him. So get ready to have your mind blown by the brilliant mind of Jordan Peterson.
And this is really a complicated problem. I don't know if I can answer this. Okay, let's try this. God, it's been years since I thought about this and wrote about it, so we'll see how I can do. You could think about this from a perspective of Piagetian constructivism. So imagine that what you confront fundamentally in the world is what is unknowable. And what is unknowable has an intrinsic meaning. It's both frightening and compelling simultaneously. It activates predator detection systems that protect you in the way that a prey animal is protected by freezing and withdrawal and that sort of thing, but it also makes you curious. So that which you do not understand, which is something that you can conceptualize as that which has not yet been made habitable world, has an intrinsic meaning.
Oh my God, what? I mean, he went for a long time there, and I was almost like, okay, I feel like you might be getting to a point, but what? Yeah, he just went off the rails.
Now the question is whether the fundamental stuff of the world is that meaningful unknown or something material. You can make the case that what we recognize as material is actually a pragmatic reconceptualization of the meaning, of the ambivalent meaning of the unknowable.
Ambivalent meaning.
Now, I know that's hard. That's a hard concept. But imagine, you see, it depends on whether or not you believe that our descriptions of material reality are the superordinate descriptions of reality, or whether our conceptualization of material is actually a form of pragmatic tool use that's oriented towards our survival. And this is not an easy thing to sort out. It's something that I did try to sort out to some degree with Sam.
Yeah, let's sort this out.
Do we have an objective description of reality, and is reality something that can be objectively described, or are we using a technology that produces so-called objective representations to facilitate our tool use? It's a hard question, right? Because obviously our advanced technology, which we use in a tool-like fashion, is a consequence of our materialist science, which begs the question, is the fundamental purpose of the science descriptive or pragmatic? Now, I tend to think it's pragmatic, because I think our fundamental problem is a problem of survival. So there's a way of looking at the world where the fundamental reality is the chaotic potential that gives rise to fear and curiosity. And that's how your nervous system responds, by the way. And see, that's interesting to me, because I would say, well, it's a truism of evolutionary biology that what your nervous system is adapted to, what you're adapted to as a consequence of your 3.5 billion years of evolution, is reality, and that there's no other real way of defining it. And so the way your brain construes reality is as if what you're confronting is an indeterminate chaotic potential that first generates something like apprehension, fear, and curiosity secondarily. The apprehension to freeze you so that you don't get eaten or destroyed, and the curiosity to allow you to engage with what's unknown and to transform it into habitable territory, which in large part consists of tools. Now, the unus mundus that Pauli and Jung talked about seems to me to be associated with this idea of that chaotic potential. And I think that's related to the physicist Wheeler's proposition that the fundamental reality of the world is information rather than material. That material is a secondary, what would you call it? It's a secondary manifestation of information. And I think that what we confront in the world, see, I don't think we're driven by the past or determined by the present. I think what we do is we apprehend the potential of the future, the chaotic potential of the future. And I think that that's associated with the tohu vabohu, which is the chaotic potential that God confronted with the Logos at the beginning of time in Genesis. I think the Genesis story is a reflection of that fundamental truth. And I think that that capability characterizes us. And so the unus mundus is the informational substrate that constitutes the world before it's divided into psyche, so that would be spirit, that would be human spirit and consciousness, and material. So there's something underneath that, and this is what Jung and Pauli were driving at in my understanding. There's something underneath that, which is the pre-division unity of reality. And that's something like the tohu vabohu, or the teom, which is etymologically cognate, by the way, with the word Tiamat. And Tiamat is the goddess that the Mesopotamian creator god Marduk confronted and cut into pieces and made the world from. So that's all outlined in Maps of Meaning, although not so much the unus mundus hypothesis. You know, and I haven't thought about that for a while. I wrote about it, but these were in papers I never published because they were too damn complicated. And I tried to publish them a couple of times, but people didn't understand what I was talking about.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, did we need to watch that? No. It went on a bit too long. It went on definitely too long. But I mean, this is the guy, he is defending this guy right now. Jordan Peterson, I feel kind of bad for like laughing at him there, because I know he has some sort of mental disorder, but he's a kind of a cringe figure. Lots of people follow him as if he's some sort of leader, and he's not. He's just not all there. He has some good advice and lots of cringe advice.
How President Trump was villainized in mainstream comics simply because of the author's personal hatred. And the
Yeah, and Trump was a fucking idiot too. Let's keep it real.
The problem isn't even the mockery itself. It's that only one side of the political perspective is being pushed, while the counter perspective is being ignored or forgotten.
Actually, yeah, the counter perspective is largely being ignored, which frustrates me.
Forgotten. To quote comics veteran Chuck Dixon, now, like the old Mad magazine, if comics were to either elevate or mock each president with the same severity to the same level, I'd be fine with it. But this is politics being pushed into a place it does not belong. Politics does not belong in superhero comics. But
okay, but the problem is Biden, who sucks, by the way. I'm not a fan of Biden. Is not nearly as mockable as Trump. Trump, you didn't even have to write jokes for Trump. You could reenact the shit he actually does in interviews, and it's hilarious. Some of his interviews are off the wall. His Axios interview is just a fucking train wreck. Like, oh my god, he's insane. And yeah, this whole, like, let's not bring politics into it. You know what? Politics are being brought into anything. They're literally bringing politics into stories by simply having characters that aren't starring white men. Politics are getting brought into everything. So, you know what? Let's stop fucking tap dancing around it. Let's stop it, okay? Just write good stories. I don't care if they're political or not. I don't. Just do a good story.
But in every case, the problems are the same. The author's neglect of craftsmanship. And here is where we see
Can you give me an example, okay? Because here's the deal. There are good stories and bad stories. There are good stories that you would call, quote, woke, that you probably haven't read because they're woke. But there are good woke stories, and there are bad woke stories.
critical difference between the diversity of manga and the diversity of woke American comics. Woke American media and the creators behind it have embarked on a crusade to reshape male-dominated genres and franchises to lure in a larger female audience. The narrative here is that they are combating some kind of age-old bigotry, an assertion banking on the myth that women...
Well, I mean, I think it's also worth noting 3 of these 5 people appear to be white men. So, I mean, there's still a lot of power to be held by being a white guy. I'm just pointing that out.
would totally rule these traditionally male-dominated spaces if it weren't for those pesky neckbeard Ferengi that apparently materialized from nowhere to stop the female from being a fan of superhero comics. So suddenly everyone gets a daughter or a mysterious woman to replace them. Even Lobo. Superhero names become titles to be handed down. More emphasis is being placed on characters like Captain Marvel, Tony Stark replaced by Riri Williams. You get Kate Bishop as the new Hawkeye, and X-23 crowned as the proper Wolverine over Logan. Disney Star Wars famously embraced the phrase, "the Force is female," effectively strong-arming men from the conversation, especially since the Force was previously absent of gender. Apparently, the gatekeepers do in fact exist, just not on the side everyone thinks they do. We must prevent the male from enjoying Star Wars. And to echo...
Oh god, this is so bad. This isn't like critical analysis at all. It's just I'm making up straw men and breaking them down. And I don't even know if I have the energy to go over all this. This is bad. This is awful.
the words of supposed Star Wars savior Dave Filoni,
I can't believe he does this for 20 more fucking minutes, because I feel like we're just on a rotating cycle right now.
this is what we tried to do with the Star Wars saga. We tried to create more female characters to represent so many things. We've probably had like 2 million straight films, cinematic roles where men have been leads, and now we have 2 in a row that were women. Well, too bad. Kind of just like Luke. All he did was open that door, right? Referring to Luke famously rescuing Princess Leia from the Death Star. Now all he did was open the door to let the real protagonist out. And every change seems to be pursued with the same underlying hostility. To quote a proud declaration by IndieWire, Black Widow not only passes the Bechtel Test, it forces men to squirm as it puts them in their place. One standout bit finds the women neutralizing their annoying adopted dad with period talk. Fantastic.
Were you really offended by Black Widow? Was this kind of, I don't know, it was fine. It doesn't thrill me, but it was fine. But were you offended by Black Widow? Because I wasn't.
Kind of disturbing childish need for revenge against a previously mentioned bigotry that very likely never existed at all. At least...
Oh my god, are you arguing that sexism and racism never fucking existed? That is legit the argument you just dropped in there. Racism and sexism don't exist and never existed. Go fuck yourself, buddy.
not to the extent claimed by many, but the notion that one can trick more women into consuming male-centric media is not only misguided, it could be argued that it's downright anti-science. To reference, Tears or Fears, comparing gender stereotypes about movie preferences to actual preferences by Peter Weir, Benjamin P. Lang, and Sasha Schwarz, says, for example, the male hormone testosterone is related to the sex drive and dominant behavior in men. This relationship could provide an account for the stronger interest of men compared to women in movies featuring competition and sex. The female hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin, however, are supposed to be related to pair bonding and feeling of love in humans. From a neurobiological perspective, this difference could be responsible for women's greater interest in romantic movies. Now here's the part that brings us right back.
Okay, we're gonna look up this study because that seems sussy as fuck. I'm just getting lots of Tears for Fears stuff. Alright, I'm not finding too much from it because everything about it is about the band. I love the band Tears for Fears, but I'm not interested in looking them up right now. So, all I'm going to say is this is a single study. It looks a little sussy. But, yeah.
To the superhero genre. To quote again, from parental investment theory, it can be predicted that women prefer media contents dealing with issues of mate choice, partner loyalty, and the loss of a partner. And men are more likely to select media contents dealing with kin protection, rivalry, status, power, and the acquisition and maintenance of resources.
Yeah, this, like, they're trying to say it's because of estrogen and testosterone, and maybe, but it also could be because of our society. Our society is built to have men value those things and women value the things that were listed there. It's kind of like built into us. It's not necessarily a genetic thing. So, yeah, this is very, very sussy right here.
Let's go over that one more time. Men are naturally drawn to media concerning kin protection. This feeds into the common male fantasy of jumping in and saving the day during a crisis. This fantasy is so common among men, in fact, that even the show Always Sunny in Philadelphia created the episode The Gang Saves the Day, an episode where each member of the gang has a daydream about stopping a robbery, except of course for Dee, who just sides with the robber, and Frank, who just dreams about hot dogs. But the kin protection fantasy is a core element of superhero fiction. After all, what is a traditional superhero story if not the story of a capable hero protecting the innocent from the forces of evil? What is the relationship between a hero and his nemesis if not a vicious rivalry? And power? The superhero genre is defined by stories following central characters with extraordinary power. And status. Superheroes, when written as heroic, are inspirations to citizens they protect, even if those in power or the system dislikes them. But where are the elements that appeal to women? Is it mate choice? Well, there is the fact that the superhero genre is filled with overtly muscly men going around being awesome, and sometimes doing this shirtless. OMG, I hate the way superhero writers objectify men by setting these unrealistic body standards. Be better. But mate choice here likely refers to the female power fantasy of mate selection. Yes, surprise, surprise, men and women aren't always drawn to the same things. Where male empowerment involves.
Well, lots of this involves, like, stereotypes, too. Here's a little thing I found living my life. Men and women are actually not as much different as people like to say. They like to be like, oh, women are from, well, yeah, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Oh, they're totally different. And the truth is, no, not really. You want to know how to talk to a woman? It's easy. Talk to them like you talk to a man. It's that easy. Don't get caught up with thinking about sleeping with them, because that's just fucking stupid. If a relationship comes out of you hanging out with a woman naturally, that's good, and that's where the best relationships come from. But if you're just so caught up in, trying to hook up with them, then yeah, you're just gonna be weird and awkward. But yeah, men and women are not that much different. They all have different personalities. They all do. Each and every single person has a different personality. So there might be women who are into the mate selection power fantasy, but there might be some who are into the kin protection power fantasy. This is fairly sexist, but yeah, there might be women who are into this type of thing. So this there's just, people are different. Every woman is different. Every man is different. Period.
Make choice. Well, there is the fact that the superhero genre is filled with overtly muscly men going around being awesome, and likely refers to the things where male empowerment involves being physically powerful. Female empowerment comes from being in a position to choose which man gets to pass on his genes. One can find this as a central element in romances or other stories that generally appeal to women.
This is like really fucking sexist. Holy shit.
I mean, there's a reason why the Twilight Saga became the phenomenon it did, and this was in part because the female protagonist got to choose between a dreamy vampire or a hunky werewolf. But you also get this in young adult novels like The Hunger Games, where Katniss Everdeen gets to choose between Peeta and Gale. However, this isn't normally a major issue in superhero stories. There's a reason why.
It's not. It's actually fairly common in superhero stories. I remember, X-Men, Cyclops and Jean Grey. There's actually two that I remember, love triangles going on there. Because Wolverine had the hots for Jean Grey, but Psylocke and Cyclops also had this little flirtation going on. So they actually had two love triangles. It is super common in superhero comic books or even male-driven stories to have love triangles. This is not this happens.
Superman's relationship with Lois Lane has become cliché. A superhero and the spunky reporter girlfriend he protects. Again, kin protection. One could bring up Batman and his various love interests, but the status quo of Batman has been that of a hero who remains either unattached or paired with Catwoman. I
mean, it's also worth noting that not really Twilight's weird. Weird. But like Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen was essentially the big superhero of that story. She was. Throughout most of that story, she is the big superhero. In fact, yeah, she's a big superhero at the end, too. So that fits into the male power fantasy. So even his own examples don't quite fit. I'm sure there have been probably one of the more famous. I don't know if they've had to have done this all these years. The love triangle between Superman and Lois, obviously, but also the flirtation between Superman and Diana, Wonder Woman, which I never really liked that relationship anyway. But they always like to play with that. Yeah. If you really break it down, all these elements are everywhere.
Someone who understands him. What about partner loyalty? This can likely be seen in the famous romance scenario where the woman is so naturally appealing that the handsome billionaire sets aside his life of hedonistic promiscuity and devotes everything to her forever. Sort of like in 50 Shades of Grey, where young, handsome, and wealthy businessman Christian Grey.
Wow, he is picking like the worst example for women. Like Hunger Games. Hunger Games isn't perfect, but Hunger Games is alright. Like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. Ooh.
Grey simply must have Anastasia Steele, relatively unremarkable college senior. And one could argue that this somewhat becomes an element when the hero saves his girlfriend, but the typical superhero story doesn't revolve around the morality and development of partnerships, like in Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. As exemplified in The Killing Joke or even Watchmen, the typical superhero story revolves around the morality and development of heroism. And partner law.
Well, that's the thing. Hunger Games is about that too. You just ignore that one. That one doesn't fit the narrative. We brought it up, but we're gonna ignore it because that doesn't quite fit the narrative, guys. Sorry, we can't discuss that one now.
This might be a motivation for a character, but rarely the core of a superhero story. For example, loss of a partner was the element that turned Superman evil in the Injustice timeline. It was part of a larger plot rather than the plot itself.
Yeah, the Injustice timeline I'm not a huge fan of, because the idea is he loses Lois and becomes a psychopath. And for a plot for just a fighting video game, it's fun. But like if you're seriously treating that like a story, like Superman loses Lois and becomes a psychopath, God, that tells me Superman's a psychopath. Because the only thing keeping him from being a psychopath is Lois. That's insane. Superman's a psychopath? That's a terrible story.
This is probably why Birds of Prey, despite being marketed as a bizarre female-driven anti-man revenge fantasy, making the main characters look as unattractive as possible, and then calling it the fantastic.
I don't know if it's possible to make Margot Robbie unattractive, and yeah, Mary Elizabeth Winstead was attractive. These are dumb arguments. Yeah, they looked fairly attractive in that. And why does it even matter? Oh.
Fabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn, men still made up more than half of its paying audience. Because despite trying so hard to make a superhero movie appeal to women, it was still, at its heart, a superhero story that emphasized physical conflict over social conflict. Contrary to popular belief, simply sprinkling women into a male-oriented genre won't immediately make women like them, and this is a truth that not even professional groveler Dave Filoni could brush aside. To quote, "There's this assumption that young girls are going to like the character of Ashoka. What we found was this amazing thing that will shock none of you. That when you create a strong, independent, intelligent character that shows no fear, that can do amazing things, boys and girls like her. Oddly enough, it isn't the gender that people connect with, it's the character. Though it should be said that the appeal of Ashoka isn't because she's fearless or can do amazing things. It's her character arc. Her change from a novice who failed and made mistakes to someone who eventually learned to do amazing things, fight back fear, and overcome hardship. This is likely why so many fans find her so appealing. In other words, Ashoka is appealing as a character for similar reasons as Luke Skywalker. To quote Jack Grapes, an award-winning poet, playwright, actor, teacher, and the editor and publisher of On the Bus, the human being is what matters. If the reader doesn't care about the human being, they could care less about the plot. They care about a character, and then they want to see what's going to happen to the character, and that's the story. So
I mean, he spent the whole thing talking about women writers and women lead characters bad, and now he's bringing up all these things that are essentially making my argument that you need to take it each by a case-by-case basis. You shouldn't have all white male writers. You shouldn't have all white male characters.
Character is most important. Every writer will tell you that. In the end, the American practice of woke diversity and inclusion often ends with what happened to John Boyega, the actor who portrayed Finn in the Disney Star Wars sequels. To quote, "What I would say to Disney is do not bring in a black character, market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side." The typical practice of woke American comics has been to make every story in every comic for everyone, while Japanese manga takes a more practical course to writing. Ironically, a practice that would completely annihilate the premise for the woke variation of X should be for everyone. Which is quite amusing, considering DeConnick followed up her earlier statement by mentioning manga. Girls read comics. Girls have always read comics. If we have more time, I would talk to you about manga and what that proved about the market. Yeah.
You are literally talking about the person who made Captain Marvel a relevant character. She made Captain Marvel. Nobody would know who Captain Marvel was if it wasn't for her. And you would probably hate it, but there wouldn't be a Captain Marvel movie if it wasn't for her. She made the most popular iteration. I already said that. She made the most popular iteration of Captain Marvel. She made Captain Marvel an actual thing. So this is... You keep on going back to her. And yeah. She made a strong female character that was popular. She legit did. Well, I guess she didn't technically make the character, but she redefined the character into something popular. Good for her.
Let's talk about that. Any assertion that manga creators strive for universal appeal regardless of story or genre, like the woke segment of American creators do, is complete disinformation. So, what is manga doing that American comics are failing to do? Well, the answer is diversity, but not the kind woke American creators want you to believe. To quote veteran comics writer Chuck Dixon, "It's not hard to see. The artwork is attractive. It's different. It's engaging. It's interesting. It's varied. So, there's a lot of reasons to like manga, and not a whole lot of reasons to like what's out now. Because what's out now for the big two is, for the most part, poorly crafted. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's poorly crafted, poorly conceived, and there's an obvious political agenda to everything, and there's no variety. The reason why series like My Hero Academia, Attack on Titan, One Punch Man, Dragon Ball Super, and Death Note could dominate the conversation in the United States is precisely because they don't try to put 10 pounds of diversity into a 5-pound bag. And why should they?
Well, I mean, for the most part, a lot of those characters are Japanese just by default. They just are.
As Dixon mentioned, manga creators, unlike woke Marvel and DC pros, produce stories that are attractive, different, engaging, interesting, and varied, instead of the same ugly characters chanting the same tired political message over and over again in one single comic genre. To put
God, this guy would be such a Comicsgate guy. Jesus Christ. Listen, if there's a comic book where all they're doing is they're spouting politics all the time and they're not focusing on story, that's an issue and that's bad writing. But I mean, I don't know, there's plenty of good political stories too. God Loves, Man Kills from the X-Men. That was a great one. Yeah. Politics doesn't automatically equal bad. You just gotta take every story as it is. Give me specific examples.
Put it simply, manga creators get ahead by developing their story craft. To quote Hirohiko Araki, creator of the legend...
I mean, this whole manga argument is kind of obnoxious because there's actually no proof that it's because of woke culture. It's what these guys scream about, but comic book sales were going down before the woke culture took over, and manga shot up. Is it because they're cheaper? Is it because they just got more accessible somehow? They're able to really penetrate the market? We don't know. But the fact is, comic book sales were going down before the woke culture change. So that's almost certainly not it.
Legendary manga/anime series JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The year I turned 16, a mangaka duo who went under the pen name Yuta Tamago made their professional debut with Ultimate Muscle. They were the same age as me, and the news gave me a jolt. I was at the age where I had to start thinking seriously about my future, and seeing their success made me go from thinking I want to become a mangaka to I will become a mangaka. I began to give real thought toward why all my efforts were leading to rejections and what made me different from Yuta Tamago. Wanting to improve one's skills instead of assuming everyone is just a bigot. What a novel idea this manga creator had.
I didn't see anybody assuming everyone was a bigot. Now, I did see people dealing with bigots, but I didn't see everyone as any certain person calling everyone a bigot. You'd have to give me a specific example on that one.
I entered the profession, a great many editors were the severe type. They were not at all of the opinion that they should avoid saying anything that could harm a novice mangaka's pride. Rather, the editors treated the novices as the professionals they aspired to be, and presented them with unsparing criticism. Editors actually doing their jobs and holding novice manga creators to a high standard of quality? I wonder how that would go if they tried that in America. How I found the solution was through systematically analyzing the first pages of popular manga. I could study those leading pages to see what the creators were trying to achieve and the effects of their techniques, and use that knowledge to bring my own work alive. Studying successful works to see how best to appeal to the fans, instead of thinking you know best and assuming any major backlash just means you're actually a genius, who the simple-minded plebeian simply can't understand. Inspiring. To paraphrase Neil Gaiman, through practice they expel most of their bad stories from their metaphorical pen. So there's no need.
Oh, Neil Gaiman would hate this guy. Here's the deal. I feel like he might be coming to my conclusion where it's all, you gotta take each thing by a case-by-case basis. Because, here's the deal. I know lots of the new comic books. I've heard lots of praise for the Sam Wilson Captain America run. I've heard lots of praise. Obviously, Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel in comic books has been very popular. Lots of praise for Jane Foster Thor. These are things that are heavily criticized by people who have almost not read them, but I've seen so much praise from people who actually have read them. I've seen praise for that Mary Jane comic book run for a little while. Mary Jane Watson had her own comic book for a while, and there's lots of praise for that from the fans who actually read it. People who actually read these things are going, this is awesome. We like it. So yeah.
Need for them to disguise their emotional immaturity as moral crusades, or use a laughably pathetic political agenda to deflect from crippling mediocrity. So yes, manga is diverse, but where they differ from DeConnick and her compatriots is that manga emphasizes diversity of story and creativity.
But yeah, lots of people like the newer comic book stories. I feel like part of the issue is that you guys keep on calling it fucking woke and shit. The whole woke narrative is disgusting and, quite frankly, racist and sexist anymore. If you're against woke culture, it's just code for being racist and sexist. As you notice, this guy had a whole section of his video that was essentially sexist. Yeah.
Again, quote Chuck Dixon, in Japanese manga, there's golf comics. There's not one comic about golf, there's multiple comics about golf. And I've made reference on these videos to one of my favorite mangas is about fishing. It's just about fishing. It's not about vampires fishing on another planet, or witches fishing, or fishing after a zombie apocalypse. This is about guys fishing, surf casting and whatever. Fishing from boats, fishing on the shore, fishing from the banks of rivers. And the stories are fascinating, beautifully drawn, and beautifully realized. To put it another way, manga will say, here's a story about a kid born without powers, but who still desperately wants to be a superhero and so earns his powers from a veteran hero through hard work, determination, and most importantly, moral strength. Or, here's a character who's invincible and infinitely strong, but who finds that his invulnerability and power has taken away all meaning in his life, to the point that he struggles to maintain his grasp on humanity. Or this character who was a former assassin, who now seeks redemption for his past sins by using his strength to defend the weak, while vowing never to kill again. While American comics tend to give us, Robin is bisexual now, that's it, that's all we got. Or, here's a lecture about how jokes are evil. Or, how about watching Kate Bishop, female Hawkeye, spend a few pages effortlessly fighting bank robbers, and then spend the rest of the story hunting down a kid whose only crime was being mean to a girl online.
Okay, well, first of all, I have to wonder if you saw the Hawkeye TV series, because that was actually pretty fucking good. But yeah, you can bring up bad examples of storytelling and good examples of storytelling. And I feel like he might be coming to my conclusion here. This is the fucked up thing. I'm sure, like, his overall takeaway is going to be completely wrong, because it's all like, it's the woke narrative destroying it. And it's not the woke narrative destroying it. It's them wanting to do more inclusion, which is, in essence, a very good thing. It's a good thing. Inclusion's a fantastic thing. But yeah, I have a feeling his end argument, we'll see, will essentially divert from it being good storytelling, because good storytelling needs to be at the focus of all this. Absolutely. 100% agree. You're right there. But I have a feeling it's going to be all against, like, you know, the woke, the diversity stuff, which is, no, there's nothing wrong with the diversity.
Riveting. Decisions like these are why you had stories like Demon Slayer topping the charts, while Kelly Sue DeConnick's Aquaman was such an era-defining failure that DC had to discontinue the series for the first time in a decade. Manga writers can take stereotypically boring subjects like golf and fishing and build them up into something interesting through a perfected craft.
I'm not going to lie. I have no interest. I don't care how interesting it is. I'm not going to read a fucking golf manga. That sounds like the most boring thing in the universe.
Imagination and a firm understanding of human nature. While your DeConnicks, Kates, and Tom Kings could take men in cybernetic suits, handsome billionaires, and aliens from half a universe away and consistently generate apathy. So, while manga is in fact diverse, and DeConnick's claims that girls read comics is true, it becomes more and more clear that the writers of Marvel and DC no longer understand that different audiences like different things. As American superhero comics devolve from good guys punching bad guys to pizza and selfies, it likewise becomes more and more clear that when comic pros present manga's diversity as a shield against criticism of their narrative-hobbling agenda, they are either being willfully obtuse or have chosen to ignore reality in favor of the illusion that their argument holds any level of credibility at all. Because the reality is that the manga dominating American markets did so because of practiced storycraft. And like any decent craftsman, they know their audiences. In fact, the entire Japanese market knows their audiences so well, they acknowledge what woke American comics refuse to acknowledge, the practice that completely shatters their assertions. While American comics pros cry, comics are for everyone, and girls have always read comics, to justify their desperate attempts to exile men from the superhero genre, Japan had taken.
Well, they don't want to exile men from the superhero genre, they just want to have more inclusion. That's all it is. I mean, people like to talk about Miles Morales, but Peter Parker ran simultaneously with Miles Morales. Jane Foster Thor ran simultaneously with, wasn't it like Thor the Unworthy, which is, you know, classic Thor, his story. I believe Tony Stark ran that simultaneously with Ironheart. The classic characters stuck around. For the most part, having their own line, maybe 100% of them still having their own line of comic books, they would just experiment and have these side stories. So the idea that they're getting, like, removed and replaced with these characters, it's, like, kind of, but, like, if you want to follow the old characters, they're still there. The white guys are still there. You can follow them.
These two ideas and put them into practice in the way they were intended, as any honest writer should. So what does this mean? It means the Japanese manga market acknowledges the idea that comics are for everyone, and girls have always read comics by separating them into genres.
God, I feel like he's like, is he getting the point or is he missing it? Because I feel like he's like so close to the goddamn point. The whole point is just write it well. Just write it well. And a lot of these are written well, and he's just not giving it a shot. But like the whole woke narrative is just annoying as fuck. God, it drives me nuts. Comic book sales went down before the whole rise of wokeness or whatever they want to call it. So they were already going down. As for manga's rise, it's not clear what it is. It's not clear. It might be part of the narrative here having an effect. Jesus Christ, it gets obnoxious. And honestly, kids are probably more affected by this than someone like me. I just find stuff like this not obnoxious, but like a lot of the kids at school that might be reading comic books might be really affected by ideas like this and like, oh, I can't read that. That's cringe or whatever. Whereas mangas may not have that shadow over them. I'm just spitballing here, but these are ideas because the wokeness seems unrelated to the dive in comic sales. It really does. But no matter what about the sales, everything should just be written well. It should be. If a story's written poorly, call out that poorly written story. Don't call it out because the lead character is a woman. Because that's sexist. It is. Bluntly, it is. But call it out for being a poorly written story.
For example, shonen for boys and shoujo for girls. And one might find it interesting to note that One Punch Man and My Hero Academia are both labeled for a male audience. One Punch Man is categorized as seinen, meaning for young men, while My Hero Academia is categorized as shonen, meaning for boys. To reiterate, the Japanese comics dominating the American market utilize practices that support the idea that men and women like different things. Shoujo, for example, normally...
Oh yeah, that's when you got super sexist. Listen, every woman likes a different thing and every man likes a different thing. Everybody's different.
Stars young women, where shonen normally stars young men. Shoujo has a greater focus on partner selection and partner loyalty, aka romance. And in shoujo, drama normally ends in social conflict rather than physical. Even the art in shoujo differs from shonen. Shoujo sports more detailed art and cuter characters. Even the fan service differs in each genre. Shoujo fan service centers on romantic situations like near kisses or the romantic leads flirting. Shonen, on the other hand, commonly have beach or hot springs episodes to showcase the female leads wearing revealing swimwear or even less.
Now, unfortunately, like when he was pointing this out among the older comic book stories, I was able to point out holes. I don't know these stories, but I'm certain there are holes in this argument too.
But only one of these is considered sexist, and I bet you can't guess which one. The next difference would probably rattle the coven of creators that has infected the American superhero when they learn that shoujo, a genre made for and is very popular with female audiences, minimize action in favor of emotion. Which essentially means shoujo knows that girls and women aren't being kept away from superhero stories, they simply have other interests. With the closest equivalent to
oh god, but what about women who prefer the action? There's plenty of them.
Female-centric superhero stories being the magical girl genre, a genre known for its pretty costumes, dazzling transformation sequences, romances, and using magic to battle, rather than using physical violence. So while One Punch Man might end an episode with Saitama's battle with a monster, a shoujo might end an episode with a romantic lead finally discovering the tragic backstory of the bad boy love interest. And the ultimate tragedy is that manga isn't even gliding on some literary secret. The American pulp magazine, The Origins of Characters Like Conan the Barbarian, Doc Savage, Buck Rogers, Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, and The Shadow once practiced similar methods. The magazine starred a variety of characters running through a variety of stories that focused on a variety of audiences. And the reason why I mentioned characters like Tarzan, Conan, and The Shadow is because these characters, much like manga, resonated with audiences. To the point that these characters have remained relevant today, in some cases, over 100 years after their debut. This is in stark contrast to many woke creations that often lose viability before they're ever even published.
Okay, so you could argue that comic book sales are going down, but a lot of times what they'll do is they'll see what the fan reaction to these characters are, and the popular ones will get adapted into the movies, and the movies will be super popular. Captain Marvel made over $1 billion. I'm sure you know this, and you probably don't want to talk about it because it's counter to your argument. But yeah, maybe Captain Marvel comic books, I know they're most successful in 2012, but I'm sure they've gone down since then. But the movie did really fucking well. And let's face it, Marvel is primarily a movie company right now. Primarily. Notice how they changed from doing the page flipping at the beginning to actually just doing movie clips? I miss the page flipping because it's their origin, but they are primarily a movie company, and their comic books are used essentially test vehicles for their movies. So like saying, oh yeah, Marvel Comics sales are down. Yeah, they've been going down for a while. But the movies are fucking gangbusters.
To summarize, which way, Western man, political activists will always wrap themselves in the shallow guise of morality. But to quote from William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose, an evil soul producing holy witness like a villain with a smiling cheek, a goodly apple rotten at the heart. Oh, what a goodly outside falsehood hath. However, while motivations may vary, it's ultimately the methods that drive people away. Writers, political or not, who fall prey to their own egos, who look down on their audiences. Your DeConnicks and Tom Kings, who believe they can dictate to the reader.
Okay, but DeConnick, I bet you, got harassed by her audience a lot, because lots of female comic books get harassed by their audience, and it's disgusting. I don't even think it's their audience, but they just get harassed on social media. So yeah, they're going to be critical of those people harassing them. I'm sure they have male fans that enjoy their stuff. I'm 100% positive on that. I'm sure they aren't going to berate them.
Rather than converse with them. Or as DeConnick once famously said, if you don't like my politics, don't buy my book. And then we didn't. But, agenda aside.
Yeah, sales have been going down, but I don't think it's because she said that.
Woke American creators champion diversity in appearance rather than substance. As we've seen with John Boyega's character Finn, when boiled down, the woke practice of representation is nothing but shallow pandering.
Well, number one, I don't think you've read any of the comic books that they're actually writing or represent. Because I've heard really good things. I haven't read them, but I'm not going to critique them because I haven't read them. And you're critiquing them and you haven't read them. Finn is poorly written. Finn's an issue.
Inclusion without purpose. Inclusion simply for the sake of inclusion. As discovered by researchers, some people just prefer different kinds of stories. Some people dislike superhero comics. Others love them. Others prefer fantasy or sci-fi or horror. In the end, it's the writer's job to know which audience they're writing for. Because yes, diversity is absolutely a strength.
So, is it the writer's job to write a good story, or is it the writer's job to give them what their audience wants? Which is it?
It's a strength manga used to thrive in the American market. It's a strength that fueled the success of the American pulp. But it's diversity of story, character, and genre that did the job, not the shallow diversity of inclusion pushed by political lunatics. Creators whose main strategy includes infecting a chosen popular genre or franchise and shifting it to, according to their claims, something for everyone, never realizing or perhaps ignoring the fact that generalizing appeal means focusing less on what drew in their enthusiastic audience in the first place. Imagine reducing the gunfights in John Wick, a franchise built on its thrilling gun battles, in the hopes of appearing more family-friendly, like putting more action scenes in Twilight to appeal to men, or ending more Punisher stories with talk and pizza instead of...
I mean, they did add that action scene in Twilight. They actually did do that. That wasn't in the book, and I think it ended up being a dream or something. So that's something that legitimately happened.
Brutal violence. Perhaps these changes would attract a small group of different people, but the original audience may turn away once the original appeal of the chosen franchise goes away, all resulting in something bland, directionless, and forgettable. In the words of Dr. Jordan Peterson, if people are not listening to you, stop talking to them. And that's the best piece of advice I can give you. If you have something to say, you say them, but you find people that will listen, leading us to the one question that every writer, every artist with a passion, a story, and a message should always remember. Would you rather be unremarkable in front of 1 million people or a rock star in front of 1,000? All resulting in something. If you have something.
Okay, this seems to be like his concluding point here, but I'm not 100% sure what
1 million
his
people
point
or a rock
is.
star in front of 1,000.
So the unremarkable in front of 1 million people, well, it would be the mangas that have the big sales right now. So they would be the unremarkable in front of 1 million, whereas the comic book sales are down, but there are a lot of people that still like them, so they'd be the rock star in front of 1,000. I mean, that's the interpretation of that. I don't think that's what he was going for, but that is 100% what that is. So, what is his conclusion? Is that they should be a rock star in front of 1,000? Or is his conclusion that being a rock star in front of 1,000 is bad, and you should just pander to your audience? I feel like there's points where he got, like, super close to what need to be said. Like when he was focusing on Ashoka. And, yes, the characters just need to be well written. Have all the diversity you want. Make every single character a character of color, fucking gay and trans. Do it all. Just as long as it's well written. I don't care. All I ask is that it's well written. I haven't read a lot of the stories these guys like to criticize, but I'm willing to bet they haven't either. And that's the problem. Read them and critique them. But yeah, I'm really getting sick of these woke culture videos. Oh my god. It's just code for being racist and sexist. That is all this shit is. And you saw, he had a whole sexist segment in there. It's all about how well it's written. All of it. There are good woke comics and bad woke comics. There are good comics starring white guys and bad comics starring white guys. Take them each as they come. And, pay attention for, there's going to be good writers. Pay attention for good writers. Pay attention to writers that you like. And God, I'm not going to lie, there's golf manga. That's the thing I was noticing when we was talking about the difference between manga and freaking graphic novels. It strikes me that manga might have a huge budget in Japan, which gives them a decent budget to just reprint over here. And they could kind of saturate the market with all types of stuff. All types of stuff. And it'd be easy for them to produce, as with the internet and things like that, it'd be easier for them to produce and realize exactly how many of each of these things they need to send over here to sell. Comic books aren't going to have that huge base that will help. I'd be interested to know how well mangas would do over here if they didn't have the huge Japanese base as their primary funding. But yeah, he brought up all the mangas and how mangas follow stereotypical female roles and stereotypical male roles, which is all kind of gross. And I'm willing to bet, because he did the same thing with American comic books, but I point out the holes in that, and I'm willing to bet I could point out the holes in those mangas too if I had read them, but I don't know the stories. He grossly misrepresented stuff. He made straw men, and he got terribly close to the answer, and then essentially just went, "Oh yeah." No. And I feel like all the time with these guys, the arguments just break down to all this stuff needs to star white guys, straight white guys. And no, they just need to be written well. They need to be written well. You want to criticize it for being written poorly? Criticize it for being written poorly. Talk about how Finn is poorly developed in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. There's a good argument there, because he is. He is very poorly developed. I love throughout Rise of Skywalker how he's talked about how he needs to talk to Rey about something, and it never fucking happens. That's bad fucking writing. And that's the thing. It's about bad writing. Focus on the bad writing. Don't focus on, oh, does it star a white dude or not? Because that's just fucking sexist and fucking cringe.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.